Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now let's dive into the story. Their shadows crawled across the red dunes, slow and deliberate, circling above a still shape half buried in sand. The sun blazed down like molten brass. Heat shimmered off the earth, warping everything in sight. A torn hat lay a few feet away, its leather band split by a bullet. Beneath it, a woman's face, sunburned, cracked and dust-covered, barely moved. Her name was Clara Vance, once known across the frontier as the Red Mare, for the wild chestnut horse she rode and the fire in her aim. Now her lips were split, her canteen empty, and the taste of blood dry on her tongue. She blinked against the burning sky and whispered a name no one could hear. Cain! Then her hand, trembling, reached for the revolver lying inches away. The cylinder clicked, empty. The echo vanished into the desert silence. It hadn't been a fair fight. It never was when greed whispered in a man's ear. Clara had ridden into Dry Hollow with a bounty to claim and a debt to collect. What she didn't know was that the same men she once called partners had turned their sights on her head. They'd stripped her horse, taken her saddlebag, and left her with a bullet in the ribs. "No hard feelings, Red," the leader had said before spitting on the sand. "Ain't personal, it's just gold." Then they'd ridden off, their laughter carrying across the dry air like glass breaking. Now, 3 days later, Clara lay dying beneath the same sun that had once guided her west. Her strength was bleeding out through the wound below her ribs, staining the sand a dull rust color. She could almost hear her father's voice again, telling her the desert takes the proud first. The memory hurt worse than the wound. 3 years ago, Clara had pulled the trigger on a man who didn't deserve it. At least, not in the way she thought. Cain Mercer, the outlaw with the black hat and eyes too soft for his trade, had spared her once when she tried to arrest him. But she'd been young, proud, and blind to mercy. She caught him again 6 months later, framed for a robbery he hadn't done. When he reached for his gun, she fired. The bullet went clean through his shoulder, and she left him bleeding near the Colorado line, swearing she'd never see him again. But fate keeps its debts. Lying half dead under the open sky, Clara wondered if the desert was her punishment, or if Cain had been the only man who might have understood what she'd become. Hours passed like years. Wind dragged thin lines across the sand. Clara tried to crawl toward a dry arroyo ahead. Its shadows looked cooler, safer, but her limbs betrayed her halfway there. The revolver slipped from her hand, half buried in dust. When she collapsed, the air left her lungs with a soft cry, half prayer, half curse. She thought of her horse, Ember, galloping free somewhere north. She thought of Cain's eyes the night she shot him, hurt, not angry. Then she closed her own. In that heavy silence, something shifted. Hoofbeats, distant, steady, growing nearer. She wanted to shout, but her throat was nothing but gravel. The last thing she saw before darkness took her was a black stallion cresting the ridge, and the glint of a silver spur catching the light. When she awoke, the world smelled of smoke and leather. Her cheek rested on a wool blanket, rough but clean. Firelight flickered over her skin, painting the desert in warm orange hues. For a moment, she thought she'd crossed over into some heaven where cowhands never aged. Then a voice came, low, calm, and too familiar. "You're a hard woman to bury, Clara Vance." She turned her head slowly. Across the fire sat a man in a dark coat, his left shoulder bound with an old scar visible through the fabric. His hat shadowed his eyes, but his voice cut through the years. Cain Mercer. The bandit she'd shot. The man she'd left for dead. 3 years, he said softly, stirring the fire with a stick. And here we are again, same desert, same bullet between us. Clara tried to speak, but tears burned her throat instead. The fire cracked, sending sparks into the dark. Clara's breath came shallow and sharp, every inhale tugging at the bandage wrapped around her ribs. Cain Mercer sat across from her, his black hat tipped low, his revolver resting beside him. The man looked older, wearier, his once boyish jawline now carved with wind and time. The scar she'd given him peeked above his collar like a pale thread against sunburned skin. "You shouldn't be alive," she rasped, voice rough as sandpaper. Cain's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You either." He poured water from a dented canteen into a tin cup and held it toward her. The metal was cool against her trembling fingers. When she drank, it tasted like forgiveness and dust. Her eyes flickered up to his. "Why'd you come back?" she asked. Cain stirred the fire once more, his gaze fixed on the flames. "Because I owed a ghost," he said. "And you looked too much like one." The night deepened. Coyotes howled somewhere beyond the dunes, their cries blending with the whisper of wind through the canyon. Cain added another branch to the fire and leaned back against a rock, eyes half-lidded. Clara studied him quietly. The same man she'd once sworn to hunt down now sat guard while she healed. "You could have left me," she muttered. "Would have made sense." Cain chuckled low. "That's the problem, Clara. Sense and I don't get along much." The sound of his laughter. It wasn't cruel like the others. It was tired but alive. For the first time in years, she let her shoulders ease. Then the question she'd buried deep tore through her chest. "Did you ever forgive me for that day?" Cain's face turned solemn. "I tried," he said simply. "But the desert remembers every bullet." His words hung heavy between them like smoke that wouldn't fade. In the flicker of firelight, Clara's memories played across the sand. The ambush at the Colorado line. The way Cain had dropped to his knees, clutching his bleeding shoulder, staring at her like he didn't believe she'd pull the trigger. She'd told herself he was guilty, that mercy was weakness. But guilt has a way of living under the skin. For 3 long years she'd carried that single gunshot in her heart, every sunrise sharpening its edge. Now, looking at him alive, she didn't know whether to thank him or beg for his forgiveness. "You should have killed me then," he said suddenly, breaking the silence. She flinched. "Don't say that." Cain's eyes found hers, steady and dark. "Maybe it would have spared us both this." His tone wasn't bitter, just honest. Like he'd made peace with pain long ago. The desert wind sighed between them, cold despite the fire's warmth. Hours passed before either spoke again. Cain finally stood, dusting sand from his coat. "You'll rest till sunrise," he said. "Then we ride north. There's water at Copper Ridge." Clara blinked. "You're taking me with you." Cain nodded once. "You won't last alone." His words struck her deeper than she expected. She didn't want his pity, she wanted redemption. "And what then?" she pressed. "You hand me over to the law." Cain smiled faintly, that same half-broken smile she remembered. "Law don't care about me, Clara. Or you. Only thing that matters out here is what a person can live with. He turned away, checking his horse's reins. The firelight caught his profile, a face carved by regret, not rage. She watched him, realizing forgiveness might not come as mercy. Sometimes it came as shared survival. When dawn bled across the horizon, painting the sky in gold and rose, Cain was already saddled up. He tossed Clara a small leather pouch. "Jerky and water," he said. "You'll ride with me till your strength comes back." Her ribs ached as she stood, but her spirit stirred. She took the pouch, noticing the old bullet lodged in his belt buckle, the one she'd fired. He kept it like a relic. Their eyes met, both knowing the desert wasn't done with them yet. As they mounted their horses, the rising sun caught Cain's scar, turning it to a line of light. Clara glanced over her shoulder at the place she'd nearly died. The buzzards were gone. Only footprints remained. 2 sets now, side by side, leading north toward a horizon that promised nothing but truth. She whispered under her breath, "Maybe ghosts can ride again." Cain didn't answer. But he didn't need to. The sun rose slow and heavy, spilling gold across the canyon's edge. Clara rode behind Cain, her chest tight with each breath, the wound in her ribs pulsing like a second heartbeat. The world stretched wide and empty, rolling dunes, distant mesas, and the faraway glint of Copper Ridge. Cain's black stallion cut a clean path through the sand while Clara's borrowed mare stumbled under her weak grip. "Keep your eyes on the ridge," Cain said without turning. "Once we hit shade, you'll rest." His voice was steady, practical, almost kind, but not soft. He'd saved her life, yes, but there was a wall between them, made of every unspoken word she owed him. Wind whistled through a dry canyon ahead. When she asked how much farther, he didn't answer. He just rode harder, like a man chasing something that wouldn't wait. By noon, the heat shimmered again, and Clara's vision blurred into streaks of gold and red. They reached Copper Ridge at sundown, a jagged rise of sandstone cut through with narrow caves. Cain dismounted first, motioning her to follow. She slid off her horse, landing unsteadily, clutching her side. He caught her arm before she fell. "You're still bleeding," he muttered, pulling her gently toward a shaded crevice where a trickle of water pooled. Clara knelt, dipping her hands in, the cool touch biting through her fever. Cain knelt beside her, silent. "You don't have to play savior," she said, voice brittle. "I know what I did." He glanced at her. "You think this is about revenge?" She blinked at him. "Isn't it?" Cain sighed. 3 years ago, you shot me for something I didn't do. But I wasn't innocent either. I ran with devils. I've done worse since." He paused, watching the dying light turn the canyon red. "I came back because I heard your name on a wanted list. $1,500. Dead or alive." The words struck like a whip. Clara froze, her reflection rippling in the water. "You're lying," she said, though her voice lacked strength. Cain reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper, worn at the edges. He tossed it beside her. Her own face stared back, dusty sketch lines, bounty inked bold. Clara Vance, murder, robbery, fugitive. The sheriff's seal of Dry Hollow stamped below. "They say you turned on your gang," Cain said quietly. "Took their gold and vanished." Clara's eyes burned. "That's not how it happened." She told him about that night. How the men she trusted had planned to rob a family rancher, how she tried to stop them, how the fight turned bloody. When the smoke cleared, 3 men were dead, and she was framed for all of it. "I never touched their gold," she whispered. Cain studied her for a long moment, the firelight catching the faint tremble in his jaw. "Then we're both ghosts," he said. They built a small camp under the ridge, sharing silence instead of trust. The stars came out, cold and countless, scattered across a violet sky. Clara watched Cain clean his revolver, his movements calm and practiced. He was a man who'd made peace with violence, but not with himself. "You planning to turn me in?" she asked. Cain didn't look up. "If I wanted the reward, you'd already be in Dry Hollow by now." "Then why?" she pressed. "Why risk your neck for a woman who shot you?" He stopped, hand still over the barrel. "Because I saw what that kind of guilt does. It eats you from the inside." His voice softened. "You saved me once, Clara, when you didn't shoot to kill. Maybe this is me paying it back." She wanted to believe him. But belief, she'd learned, was the quickest way to die in the West. By dawn, the ridge glowed amber, the desert quiet except for the whisper of wind through sagebrush. Clara woke to find Cain gone. Panic rose, but before she could stand, she saw movement near the horses. Cain returned carrying something wrapped in burlap. He dropped it beside her with a grunt. "Found this buried under the old trail marker," he said. Inside lay a rusted lockbox stamped with the same rancher's brand from her past. Her breath hitched. "That's the Cartwright seal," she murmured. "The night everything went wrong." Cain met her eyes. "Looks like someone wanted it found." She opened the lid slowly. Inside was a single revolver, engraved with her initials, and a gold coin resting beneath it. "What does it mean?" she whispered. Cain's gaze darkened. "It means somebody's still hunting you, Clara." The ridge seemed to grow colder then. The ghosts weren't behind them anymore. They were closing in. The air was still at first, too still. The kind of silence that comes before a sandstorm or a gunfight. Clara sat near the dying embers of their campfire, clutching the old revolver from the lockbox. Her initials were carved on the grip, but the weapon felt heavier than memory. "You think someone planted it?" she asked. Cain nodded, scanning the ridge with eyes sharpened by instinct. "That box wasn't buried long. Whoever left it wanted you to find it." He glanced toward the horizon. "And they ain't far." Clara's stomach turned. The last time she'd trusted anyone, they'd left her for dead. She rose to her feet, wincing at the pull in her ribs. Cain motioned for her to stay low. "If they come, they'll come from the east," he whispered. "Sun at their backs." Classic mistake. Clara smirked faintly. "You always did love a fair fight." Cain's grin was brief, shadowed. "Ain't no such thing in the desert." The first shot cracked through the morning air. Clara dropped instinctively, sand spraying across her face. Cain dove beside her, returning fire toward the ridge above. The echo rolled like thunder, bouncing off stone walls. A figure appeared through the glare, broad shoulders, dark hat, rifle gleaming. Clara's heart clenched. "That's Reddick," she hissed. The same outlaw who'd betrayed her 3 years ago. Cain's eyes narrowed. "He's alive. Alive and twice as mean," she said, loading the revolver with shaking hands. Another shot whistled past, sparking against the rock beside them. Cain ducked low, scanning the slope. "3 of them, maybe 4, he muttered. "You handle left, I'll draw right." Clara took aim, the weight of the revolver steadying her breath. For a brief moment, the world shrank to sunlight, sand, and the slow pull of her trigger. The bullet struck true. One shadow tumbled down the ridge in silence. Gunfire split the canyon. The smell of gunpowder mixed with dust and fear. Cain moved like smoke, quick, deliberate, fearless. Clara caught glimpses of him between bursts of light. His coat whipping through the wind. His revolver spitting justice into the dawn. The last time she'd seen him fight, he'd been bleeding out on desert soil. Now he was a storm. Reddick's voice boomed from above. "You should have stayed buried, Red." Clara fired back without hesitation. Guess the desert changed its mind. Her words cut through the chaos, echoing off the stone. Another outlaw tried to flank them from behind, but Cain turned just in time, firing a single shot that dropped the man mid-step. Then silence again. The kind that hums after death passes by. Clara's hands trembled as she reloaded. "Two down," Cain said, scanning the ridge. "But Reddick ain't one to run." His eyes flicked to her side. "You bleeding again?" Before she could answer, movement flashed, a figure leaping from the rocks behind. Clara spun too late. Reddick slammed into her, knocking her revolver free. They crashed to the ground, the impact burning through her wound. His grin was all rotten rage. "You cost me men and money, Red," he growled, pressing the barrel of his pistol against her jaw. "Now you'll pay with breath." Cain shouted, but Reddick dragged Clara in front of him, using her as a shield. "Drop it, Mercer, or I'll send her to hell first." Cain froze, his revolver steady, eyes locked on hers. In that moment, Clara saw something raw behind his calm. Fear, real and human. "Don't," she whispered, voice thin but fierce. "Take the shot." Reddick laughed. "You think he'll risk it?" Clara smiled weakly. "He already did once." The words threw him off just long enough. Cain fired. Reddick fell before the echo died. The shot went clean through his shoulder, spinning him back. Clara tore free, grabbed her revolver, and fired once. The bullet hit his chest, and Reddick collapsed into the sand, eyes wide, face twisted in disbelief. For a long moment, neither she nor Cain moved. Only the wind dared breathe. Then Cain stepped closer, kicking Reddick's gun away. "You should have stayed gone," he muttered. Reddick's voice rasped one last time. "You think this ends with me? They're coming for both of you. And they already know your trail." His eyes glazed over, the life leaving like smoke from a dying flame. Clara stood trembling, revolver hanging loose at her side. Cain reached out, steadying her shoulder. "You all right?" She met his gaze, voice soft. "I'm still breathing." He nodded toward the horizon. "Then we ride." Behind them, Copper Ridge burned orange in the rising sun, like the desert itself had just witnessed justice. The smoke from the gunfight hung low over Copper Ridge, curling through the morning air like ghosts refusing to leave. Clara stood beside Reddick's body, silent. The desert wind tugged at her hair, streaked with dust and blood. Her revolver hung limp in her hand. Cain knelt near the corpse, checking for signs of life he already knew weren't there. "He's done," he said quietly. Clara's eyes hardened. "Not all of them." She kicked sand over Reddick's face, burying him halfway. "He said they were coming. How many you think he meant?" Cain rose slowly, his shadow long and lean in the rising sun. "Doesn't matter. Men like him always have brothers. blood or not. He walked to the horses, tightening the saddles. Clara lingered a moment longer, staring at the half-covered body. Part of her wanted to say a prayer. The other part knew the desert didn't listen. She mounted her horse without looking back. They rode east, the sun chasing them across the horizon. Every hoofbeat stirred dust that glowed like fire in the light. Cain led, scanning the open land for movement. Clara followed close, her ribs aching but her spirit sharpened. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was heavy, filled with everything they weren't ready to say. Around midday, Cain finally broke it. "You shoot clean," he said. "Even with a hole in your side." Clara smirked faintly. "Guess dying once teaches you a few tricks." His grin was brief but real. "You always were too stubborn to quit." The words warmed her chest more than the sun did. She wanted to thank him for saving her, for believing her, but the words tangled somewhere between her heart and throat. Instead she asked, "Where we heading?" Cain pointed toward a thin line of mountains in the distance. "Through the Badlands. Then south. There's a town called Mercy Bluff. Fitting name, don't you think?" They reached the edge of the Badlands by dusk. The air turned cooler, sharper, carrying the scent of creosote and dry sage. Long shadows stretched across the rocks, and the sky burned deep orange. They made camp near a crumbling ledge overlooking a canyon. As Cain built a small fire, Clara sat watching the flames flicker in his eyes. He looked tired, older than she remembered, but steady. "You ever think about stopping?" she asked softly. Cain didn't answer right away. "Once," he said. "Bought a cabin near Prescott. Tried to live honest. Didn't last long." He poked at the fire with a stick. "Out here, the past always finds you." Clara nodded slowly. "I know that feeling." The silence after carried something different. Mutual understanding, quiet and dangerous. Then Cain looked up, gaze sharp again. "You feel that?" he asked. Clara tilted her head. The horses shifted nervously. A whisper of movement echoed beyond the rocks. Cain was on his feet in an instant, revolver drawn. Clara followed his lead, scanning the dark edges of the canyon. The sound came again, metal clinking softly, then footsteps crunching gravel. A voice called out, low and mocking. "You make quite a pair, don't ya?" 3 figures stepped into the firelight, guns drawn, eyes glinting under wide brims. Their coats bore the same silver insignia Reddick wore, the mark of the Black Spur Gang. "Ain't we popular?" Cain muttered. Clara rose slowly, hand steady on her revolver. "We don't want trouble," she said, though her tone made it clear she expected it anyway. The tallest of the 3 smirked. "Too late for that, Red. We're here to collect." His voice dripped with confidence. "Word is, you're worth more alive than dead. But I don't mind the extra work if you make me." Cain's stance shifted subtly. 3 against 2, he said. "Almost fair." The leader grinned. "Then let's dance." The night erupted in fire. Muzzle flashes painted the canyon walls white and gold. Cain moved first, ducking behind a boulder, returning shots with deadly precision. Clara dropped low, rolling across the sand, firing twice. 1 outlaw fell. The horses screamed and bolted into the dark. "Left side!" Cain shouted, and she turned just in time to see another man flanking him. Her shot caught him square in the chest. Silence followed, broken only by the echo of their breathing. The last outlaw was gone. Cain scanned the shadows, tense. "He's running," Clara said. "No," Cain replied. "He's tracking." He kicked dirt over the fire, plunging them into darkness. The stars burned cold above them. "We can't stay here," he said. Clara nodded, strapping her revolver. "Then we ride blind." As they mounted up, the canyon wind carried a faint whistle. 3 short notes repeated twice. "Signal." Cain's jaw tightened. "They know where we're headed." The trail to Mercy Bluff had just turned deadly. The first thing Clara noticed about Mercy Bluff was the silence. The kind that sat heavy on your chest and made every footstep sound too loud. The town looked half asleep under the morning sun. Wooden signs swaying in the wind, dust curling through the narrow street. A dog barked once, then vanished behind a porch. Cain led his horse down the main road, hat low, eyes scanning the windows. "Don't look like much," Clara murmured. "Ain't supposed to," Cain replied. "That's why it's still standing." They stopped outside a weathered saloon with faded lettering. "The Last Prayer." The name earned a smirk from both of them. Inside, the air smelled of tobacco, coffee, and secrets. A handful of locals sat scattered around, talking in low voices. The barkeep, a wiry woman with silver hair and a shotgun under the counter, looked up. "Ain't seen your faces round here before." Cain tipped his hat. "We're just passing through." Her eyes lingered a second longer on Clara's holstered revolver. "Aren't we all?" They took a table in the corner, backs to the wall. Clara removed her hat, shaking dust from her hair. Cain poured 2 cups from the coffee pot the barkeep slid their way. The warmth felt strange in her hands, like something she hadn't earned. "So," she said after a moment, "you trust this place?" Cain's lips barely twitched. "Trust don't buy much out here. But Mercy Bluff's quiet. That's worth something." Clara leaned back, studying him. There were fine lines around his eyes now, marks of years spent squinting into the sun or staring down barrels. "You ever wonder how many people you've killed?" she asked softly. He didn't flinch. "I used to. Then I realized counting don't bring any of 'em back." His voice was low, edged with something that sounded like regret. "And you?" She hesitated. "Only one I remember." He met her gaze. "The bandit." Clara nodded. "The same one who pulled me out of the sand 3 years later." Cain's expression darkened. "You think I came back for revenge?" he asked. Clara didn't look away. "Didn't you?" The silence stretched, heavy as thunder. Cain exhaled slowly. "I came back because I owed you." She frowned. "For what?" "For showing me I could bleed," he said simply. His voice carried no anger, just truth. "You shot me clean. No hesitation. That kind of mercy's rare." Clara didn't know how to answer. She wanted to tell him she hadn't done it out of mercy, that she'd been scared, desperate, and alone, but something in his eyes stopped her. The barkeep interrupted them with 2 bowls of stew. "How special," she said. "Eat while it's hot." Cain nodded his thanks, but his gaze drifted toward the saloon door. 2 men had just walked in, broad-shouldered, dust-covered, their boots too clean to belong to drifters. One of them wore a black spur. Clara froze. "They found us." Cain's hand slipped under the table, resting on his revolver. "Act natural," he whispered. The 2 men took a seat near the bar, pretending not to notice them, but their eyes never left Clara. She picked up her spoon, forcing herself to eat. The stew tasted of salt and old fear. "We can't fight here," she murmured. "Too many eyes." Cain nodded subtly. "Finish up." We walk out slow, left side of the street. She took a final sip, then rose. The men at the bar stood at the same time. Cain placed a coin on the table and turned for the door. "Morning, gentlemen," he said calmly. The taller of the two smiled thinly. "Morning, Marshal." The word hit like a bullet. Clara's head snapped toward Cain. "Marshal," she hissed under her breath. But there was no time for answers. The men drew their guns. Cain shoved her aside, overturning the table as the first shot shattered the whiskey bottles behind the bar. The saloon exploded in chaos. Patrons dove for cover as glass and smoke filled the air. Cain fired twice, dropping one outlaw. Clara rolled behind the piano, returning fire through the haze. The barkeep pumped her shotgun and blew out the front window, yelling, "Out the back!" Clara sprinted, boots pounding on the floorboards. Cain covered her, firing until his gun clicked empty. They burst into the alley, sunlight blinding after the smoke. A horse neighed nearby. Cain vaulted into the saddle, pulling Clara up behind him. "Hold tight," he shouted. Bullets whined past as they tore through the narrow street, dust exploding beneath the hooves. The last thing Clara saw before the town vanished behind them was the barkeep standing in the shattered doorway, smoke curling from her shotgun, shouting something she couldn't quite hear. The road ahead stretched endless and burning. "You gonna tell me when you plan to mention you're a marshal?" she yelled over the wind. Cain's jaw tightened. "When you stopped runnin' from the truth." They rode until the sun began to bleed into the horizon, painting the desert in fire and sorrow. Clara hadn't spoken for miles. Cain rode ahead, his hat brim shadowing his face, his badge now glinting faintly against his vest. It wasn't the metal that angered her. It was the lies. "A marshal," she finally said, her voice cutting through the wind. "All this time you were the law." He slowed his horse, looking back at her. "Was," he corrected. "Ain't no badge that means much when the men you ride with turn outlaw." Clara's grip on the reins tightened. "Then why keep it?" He touched the badge, eyes distant. "Because it reminds me who I was before I forgot how to forgive." His tone was quiet, like a confession. They stopped by an old watering hole surrounded by mesquite trees. The horses drank as the air cooled. "You saved me, Clara," Cain said. "But you don't know from what." She stared into the rippling water. "Then tell me." He hesitated, then said, "The Black Spur Gang, they were my men. I trained them, rode with them, until they became the thing I swore to stop." The wind carried his words into the open desert, where they settled like ash. Clara turned slowly, her eyes narrowing. "You're telling me the men who killed my brother, who left me to die in that canyon, were your men?" Cain didn't answer right away. The silence said enough. "I tried to stop them," he said finally, his voice rough. "But I was too late. The job turned bad. Your brother stood in their way. They didn't take kindly to witnesses." Clara felt her throat tighten. The world seemed to tilt, heat and grief swirling together. "You knew," she whispered. "You knew it was them all along." He nodded once. "And you let me believe they were strangers." Her eyes burned with rage and disbelief. "You pulled me out of that sand, Cain, just to bury me in lies." His jaw clenched. "I was gonna tell you when it was safe." She stepped closer, trembling. Safe. You don't get to use that word. Not after what you took from me. For a long moment neither moved. The desert was still, heavy with everything they couldn't say. Cain finally spoke. His voice cracked and low. I never wanted you to see me like that. I thought if I could end the gang myself, maybe I could give you peace. Clara laughed bitterly. Peace? You think killing them would have made it right? You think that badge makes you clean? She pointed at it like a curse. You wore that while your men killed my family. Cain's shoulders sagged. I wear it because I couldn't stop them. Because I still believe in something worth dying for. Clara shook her head, tears glinting in the dying light. And I believed in you. She turned away, walking toward her horse. Where are you going? He called. To finish what you couldn't, she said coldly. If the Black Spur gang's still breathin', I'll make sure they stop. Cain watched her ride off into the setting sun, her silhouette fading into the golden haze. He whispered after her, Then I guess I'll follow you to the end. That night, Clara camped alone under a sky full of burning stars. She stared up sleepless, haunted by faces she could never forget. Her brother, the men who laughed as they left her for dead, and now Cain, the man she thought she could trust. The desert wind sang soft and cruel through the canyon. She reached for her revolver, tracing the initials carved into its handle, her brother's. I'll make it right, she whispered. A shadow moved near the ridge. She froze, hand on her weapon. Cain, she called. No answer. Then footsteps. 3 of them. Clara rolled to her feet, gun raised. From the darkness stepped a man she recognized instantly. Jed Cormac, the one-eyed devil from the Black Spur gang. Evenin', sweetheart, he drawled, grinning wide. Didn't reckon we'd meet again so soon. Behind him, 2 more shadows emerged. Clara's heart pounded, but her hand was steady. I've been looking for you, Jed. He laughed. Funny. Cain said the same before he started running. Cain's voice thundered across the canyon. Drop it, Jed. Clara spun as Cain appeared from the darkness, rifle aimed. His face lit by moonlight. The bandits turned, startled, but Jed only grinned wider. Marshal Cain Wade. Thought you were dead. Cain stepped closer. That can still be arranged. The air thickened, silent but alive with tension. Then gunfire. The night exploded in flashes of fire and sand. Clara ducked behind a boulder, returning shots. Cain moved like a ghost, deadly and calm. 1 outlaw fell. Another fled. Jed lunged, firing wild. Cain took a hit to the shoulder but didn't stop. He tackled Jed to the ground, fists flying. You led them. Cain roared. You turned on the badge. Jed laughed, blood in his teeth. You turned on yourself. Cain struck again, but Jed's knife flashed upward. Clara screamed, firing once, clean through Jed's chest. He collapsed, eyes still open, smile fading with the night. Cain rolled away, bleeding, breathing hard. Clara dropped her gun, rushing to him. Don't you die on me again, she whispered, pressing her hands to his wound. He looked up half-conscious, whispering, Guess, you still shoot straight. The desert sky was bruised with twilight as Clara pressed a bandage against Cain's shoulder. Her hands shaking but determined. The fire from the ridge smoldered low, casting long shadows across the sand. Cain leaned against a boulder, teeth clenched against the pain, watching her work. You shouldn't do this, he muttered, voice tight. Why not? Clara asked, eyes sharp. Because it's reckless. Because if you bleed while saving me, I'll be forced to carry you the rest of the way. She smirked faintly, despite exhaustion. Then carry me, she whispered, tightening the bandage. The air was thick with dust, gunpowder, and something unsaid between them, a fragile trust born from fire and survival. Cain watched her, noting every line of her face hardened by loss yet softened by the desert's golden light. You know, he said quietly, I thought the world was empty after I shot you that day. Clara froze, glancing up. And now? His lips twitched in the faintest of smiles. Now I know it's never empty. It just waits for the right people to fill it. They moved cautiously at dawn, leaving the ridge behind, heading south toward a narrow pass Cain knew well. Every mile felt heavier with the knowledge that the Black Spur gang still lurked in the shadows, waiting for another chance. Clara's horse stumbled once, forcing her to steady it with raw muscle and resolve. Cain slowed, watching her struggle, then offered his hand. Lean on me if you need to. She hesitated, pride wrestling with trust. Finally she grasped it, feeling the steady strength beneath his fingers. The connection startled her. How quickly reliance became necessity. They rode in silence, the desert stretching around them like a canvas of gold and crimson. Each ridge, each shadow, each rock seemed alive with the ghosts of their past. Clara realized that every step she took beside Cain was a promise. Silent, unspoken, but heavier than any oath she'd taken before. By midday the pass narrowed, cliffs rising on either side. The wind whistled through the crevices, carrying dust and the faint scent of sagebrush. Cain stopped suddenly, hand raised. Clara froze beside him, eyes scanning. Footprints, too many, too fresh, cut across the sand ahead. They're waiting, Cain said softly, a grim edge in his voice. And they know we're coming. Clara felt her pulse quicken. We can't outrun them, she muttered. Cain shook his head. No. But we can end it. He scanned the cliffs, noting every shadow, every likely ambush point. Then he turned to her. This is it, Clara. You ready to see justice done? She swallowed, grit in her throat, and nodded. I've waited 3 years for this. Cain's jaw tightened. Then we ride together. The sun blazed behind them, painting them in heroic light. A pair forged in survival, revenge, and something that might yet be called hope. The ambush came swiftly, as Cain had predicted. 3 riders emerged from the cliffs, rifles leveled, eyes glinting like knives. Clara's heart leapt, but her hands were steady. We've got this, Cain whispered. They charged simultaneously, dust and gunfire erupting around them. Clara fired with deadly accuracy, hitting one rider square in the chest. Cain tackled another from his horse, fists and boots driving him to the sand. The third wheeled, gun swinging, aiming at Clara. She ducked, rolling behind a boulder, then fired twice, once hitting the horse, once striking the rider's leg. The desert rang with cries and gunshots, the wind carrying echoes of vengeance. Then silence fell suddenly, thick and absolute. Clara rose cautiously, scanning. The riders were down, wounded or fleeing. Cain approached, bleeding but alive, and she met his gaze. In that moment, all the anger, fear, and grief they'd carried seemed to melt into the heat-baked sand. They finally stopped at the edge of the pass, breathing hard, weapons still drawn. Cain leaned against a boulder, shoulder wrapped in bloodied bandages, while Clara wiped sweat and dust from her face. You did good, he said, voice quiet but firm. Clara shook her head, exhausted but resolute. We both did. But it ain't over. Cain looked at her, reading the fire in her eyes. Then we finish it. Together. She nodded, a weight lifting from her shoulders. No more running, she said. Cain smiled faintly, brushing dust from his coat. No more running. And maybe, just maybe, we get to start forgiving ourselves along the way. The sun dipped low, golden and forgiving, stretching across the desert as if the land itself approved. Clara realized then that revenge had brought them here, but trust, and maybe something closer to love, would guide them out. They rode side by side into the setting sun, shadows long, hearts heavy but unbroken, ready for whatever came next. The horizon burned crimson as Clara and Cain approached the Black Spur Gang's hideout, a ramshackle cluster of wooden cabins half buried in the canyon, dust curling around sagging roofs. Clara's heart pounded, her hand steady on her revolver. "This is it," she whispered, voice barely carrying over the wind. Cain nodded, eyes scanning every ridge and shadow. No mistakes. One slip and it's over. They dismounted a safe distance away, moving on foot, using boulders and sparse sagebrush for cover. The air was heavy, metallic, and alive with anticipation. Clara's ribs ached, but adrenaline sharpened her senses. The smell of gunpowder, sweat, and the desert itself clung to her, reminding her how close they were to the reckoning. She glanced at Cain, whose face was a mask of calm, yet the tension in his shoulders betrayed the stakes. "Remember," he said quietly, "we end this on our terms. No mercy for them, but none for mistakes either." She nodded. Together they crept closer, the wooden structures looming like vultures over the canyon floor, waiting for the battle that would decide everything. The first shot rang out before they reached the front door. Cain rolled to the side, firing accurately, taking down the lookout perched on the roof. Clara followed, ducking behind a barrel as another outlaw aimed her way. The bullets ripped through the air like angry hornets. Her revolver barked twice, once through a narrow window, once catching a man trying to flank Cain from behind. The air was thick with dust and echoes of death. Cain shouted, "Inside! Clear it!" They stormed the main cabin, guns raised, boots kicking up splintered wood. Inside, the gang's leader, a broad man with a scarred face and a cruel grin, leveled his pistol. "So the little red-headed ghost comes to play," he sneered. Clara's blood boiled. "You left me for dead once. Today it ends." Cain fired beside her, forcing the leader to duck, and she stepped forward, revolver raised, pulse steady, ready to finish what 3 years of terror had begun. The fight inside the cabin was brutal. Cain moved like a shadow, taking down men with precision, every strike deliberate. Clara ducked behind furniture, firing over tables, pushing through the adrenaline and pain. The floorboards cracked under boots and blood, the smell of smoke and gunpowder filling every corner. The leader lunged at her with a knife. Clara twisted, firing once. The bullet hit true, and he crumpled to the floor. Cain threw a chair at another man trying to escape, then pinned him with a kick to the chest. For a moment time slowed, the dust, the noise, the fear, all blending into one. Clara's chest heaved. She felt the weight of every lost friend, every betrayal, every moment she had struggled to survive. And yet, with Cain by her side, she felt a strange clarity. They were no longer hunted. They were hunters, and justice was finally in their hands. The last of the gang tried to flee through the back door, but Cain was ready. He fired, grazing the man's shoulder, sending him sprawling into the sand. Clara pursued, revolver raised, anger and relief mingling in her veins. Outside, the sun cast long, golden streaks across the canyon, illuminating the destruction left behind. The gang lay defeated, wounded or unconscious, and the desert seemed to exhale, the wind carrying away the echoes of gunfire. Cain approached Clara, blood and sweat streaking his face, and for the first time in 3 years, she allowed herself to smile. "It's over," he said. "All of it." Clara's voice trembled. "Doesn't bring him back," she whispered, thinking of her brother. "But it's justice." Cain nodded, eyes shadowed but soft. "Sometimes that's all we get in this world." The canyon remained silent, as if agreeing, and the weight of vengeance finally lifted from their shoulders. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Clara and Cain sat on a rock overlooking the hideout, guns still in reach but hearts lighter. The desert stretched before them, endless, golden, and merciful. Clara rested her head against Cain's shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his chest. "I thought I'd hate you forever," she admitted quietly. Cain brushed dust from her coat. "I thought I'd never trust anyone again." Silence wrapped them, warm and protective, as if the desert itself were sheltering them. "What now?" Clara asked. Cain's gaze swept the canyon, eyes softening. "Now we live. We move forward together if you'll let me." She nodded slowly. "Together." The wind carried the faint scent of sage and smoke, the horizon glowing with the last light of day. The Black Spur gang was no more, the past faced and conquered. And in that golden hour, Clara realized that survival was more than staying alive. It was forgiving, trusting, and riding into tomorrow with someone who had finally proven worthy of that trust. The desert morning was soft, golden, and quiet. Clara awoke first, the remnants of their campsite scattered behind them, the Black Spur gang finally defeated. Her ribs ached, but the wound was stable, and more importantly, her heart felt lighter than it had in years. Cain stirred beside her, the sun glinting off his weathered hat and scarred face. For the first time since Copper Ridge, they did not speak of past horrors, just the gentle rhythm of the desert wind. Clara rose, brushing dust from her coat, and looked toward the horizon. The canyon stretched endless and forgiving, painted in shades of gold and rose. Cain followed her gaze, his hand resting lightly on hers. "We made it," he said softly. Clara nodded, swallowing a lump in her throat. "We did. And somehow, it feels like more than surviving." They mounted their horses, ready to ride, but for the first time, the weight of danger felt gone. The desert seemed to breathe with them, wide and open, as if granting them permission to live free, finally unburdened by the ghosts of vengeance. Their journey out of the canyon was quiet at first, the only sounds the steady clop of hooves and the whisper of wind. Clara glanced at Cain, noting the faint lines of exhaustion and relief etched into his face. "You never told me why you stayed after Reddick," she said softly. Cain shifted in his saddle. "Because even when the world leaves you for dead," he said, "there's always someone willing to see the truth. You saved me once, Clara. I thought it was time to pay it back in full." Her heart swelled with a mixture of pride, gratitude, and something deeper, something she had kept hidden in the desert sands of the past 3 years. "I thought I had no one," she admitted. "And yet, I have you." Cain's hand brushed hers instinctively, gentle but firm. "Then let's not waste the rest of it," he said. And in that moment, The barren, harsh desert felt warm, protective, as though it had been waiting for them to claim it as theirs. By midday, they reached the outskirts of a small town, quiet and welcoming in contrast to Mercy Bluff. The streets were clean, the people kind-eyed, and there was an inn with a wooden porch that creaked under the weight of possibility. Clara dismounted, taking a deep breath of fresh air, feeling the freedom of movement after months of running and hiding. Cain dismounted beside her, his hand brushing hers. "Looks peaceful," she said, a small smile forming. "For now," Cain replied, voice soft. "And that's enough." They walked side by side toward the inn, the weight of the past heavy behind them but growing lighter with each step. Clara realized that surviving the desert, the betrayals, and the gunfire had taught her something invaluable. That strength was not in vengeance alone, but in choosing to keep moving forward, even when the horizon seemed endless and uncertain. The innkeeper, an older man with kind eyes and a soft smile, welcomed them warmly. "You look like you've been through hell," he said. Cain nodded briefly. "You could say that," Clara added, "but we're ready for a new beginning." The inn's warm interior smelled of bread and coffee, and the wooden floors creaked under their boots. They found a room together, small but comfortable, and settled inside. Clara placed her revolver on the table, then leaned back against the wall, letting the quiet of the room seep into her bones. Cain joined her, brushing dust from his coat. "No more running," she said quietly, more to herself than to him. "No more running," Cain echoed, the weight of the past 3 years finally lifting. Outside, the desert stretched endless, golden and forgiving, and for the first time, both of them believed they could face tomorrow without the shadows of vengeance pressing in. That night, the stars blanketed the sky, vast and infinite, as Clara and Cain sat on the inn's porch. Silence surrounded them, comforting and complete. Clara rested her head on Cain's shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. "Do you think we'll ever forget the desert?" she asked softly. Cain chuckled low and warm. "Maybe. But we'll remember each other. And that's enough." Clara smiled, tears threatening but unneeded. "I never thought I'd get this," she whispered. "Peace, I mean." Cain kissed her forehead gently. "You earned it," he said. "We both did." The night stretched around them, quiet, safe, and infinite. The desert, once a place of death and betrayal, now held only memory, learning, and promise. As they sat together, watching the first hints of dawn paint the horizon, Clara realized that surviving had led them here, not just to life, but to something more: trust, love, and the chance to finally write the rest of their story together.